Okay, welcome everybody. I am so excited to have my friend Cynthia with me today to talk about her new book. But before we get to that, Cynthia, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
All right. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I am really excited to be talking with you. And I hope this is of value to those that will listen who are interested in partnerships, because that's the big why of why I went through the fun of 2 years of writing it. But I am Cynthia Currence. I am a mother, grandmother, fiance, now newly author, and I've got a whole lot of experience in nonprofits. So I'm just delighted to be able to get the word out about the book, and so thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so psyched about it. Beyond Checks and Halos, I've got the copy right here. And in the show notes, I'll put a link so people can grab their own copy. I loved the book. I mean, I was sort of predisposed to love it because what you're talking about and who you reference in the book. I mean, Tad Hutchison's got a quote on the cover. I mean, this is like reading about all my friends. um, but will you just give a quick, like, again, you sort of alluded to it about partnerships and relationships, but like, what's the high level idea of the book?
The high level idea is that most relationships between companies and nonprofits are simple and transactional. And those are great. Those are powerful ways to be able to work together and to do good for the company and do good, if you will, for the nonprofit. But there is a much bigger horizon out there. I mean, sponsorships are wonderful. Grants are wonderful, but they are very transactional and they're single focused and not usually long term in nature. But the book goes into some examples of how we can build high value relationships between companies and nonprofits that solve business problems. And so the book starts with really inviting both profits and nonprofits to look again, not
Mm,
only at themselves, but at each other, so that they can identify what kind of assets they might have from each other and what kind of unique pain points they might have. Because if you can align assets and pain points in a certain way, you can do magic, like what Vicky Escara did with Sam's Club. I mean, she solved a huge perishable food problem for Sam's Club, and she led Feeding America to transform from a $20 million organization to a $2 billion
mm.
organization. So these ideas are big, but it's certainly not a knock on the traditional transactional relationship, because a lot of good comes from that as well.
Yeah. But I think, as I read this book, I thought to myself, gosh, I wish I had had this book when I started 48 and 48 back in 2015. And because I feel like we had some great initial partners that I think were supporting the organization, because I knew them. But I didn't know enough then to really focus on what are the unique attributes of 48 and this company and how can we build a long lasting relationship. And man, as I read this, I was like, so many mistakes I made. So I can see why it would have helped me. How long has this been in your head? Like this idea of getting this out there?
Oh gosh, this has been in my head a dozen years. I had a wonderful opportunity to work with the American Cancer Society for 18 years. I started in branding and marketing. I was vice president for brand strategy and marketing. And then they gave me, I kept telling the fundraisers how to fundraise, who to market, what to say, what's in it for them, those kind of things.
Mhm.
And they essentially one day said, okay, Smarty Pants, we really like your idea of doing more with companies. You want to lead a business unit, create it and lead it. And so that was a phenomenal opportunity. And when I did that, that's when I truly started learning and seeing things that could be in terms of relationships. So the book began then when I got that opportunity. About half of my career was in strategy and research and that kind of thing. The latter half of my career was in different types of fund development opportunities and
Mm,
leading teams that did that. But that's when it started.
yeah.
And then I got a chance to talk with companies and get an idea of what their needs were, and the conversations evolved naturally. And I do think that from the very beginning of my career, all of the things that I have had the opportunity to do, both the bloopers and the
Mhm.
wins and all of that. The things I thought maybe painful at a time, as well as the things that were just joyous. All of them kind of coalesced. And I kept thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be great to be able to write the book? And I never had time until I retired 2 years ago. And so I've had this great opportunity to focus on it over the last 2 years, and a wonderful opportunity. So part of it was, yeah, I think I got some stories to tell, but there are many, many other stories, like Vicky's story that I
Mhm.
mentioned, that are out there. And so through friends, I was able to contact and interview 35 other people. So the book is like the wisdom of these 35
Yep.
people coming together. And what I tried to do was distill what what are the common threads of success? What are the common things that led to really big, robust wins for both companies and nonprofits? So that's probably more than you wanted from that question.
No. No, it was great because I think where I wanted to go next was talk about some of those friends for a second. Like, again, like I felt like I was, reading about all my favorite people in Atlanta. So I'll just name a few people that you mentioned in here. Obviously, Ken Bernhardt, who, we both adore for different reasons. But I think I'll just stop there for a second. And Ken was the first person that got me um, focused as a young leader on getting involved with nonprofits. And that's where I met Vicky when I did junior achievement and joined the Children's Museum Board and Jane. And like, he threw me into that world, but, he always impressed upon me the importance of relationships. But, you've got Ken, you've got Ed Baker, Jane Turner, as I mentioned, Hey Lamotomog, obviously, Ann Kramer, Vicky, Daryl Evans, Raymond. I mean, I was going to ask you about Raymond King, but like, I think it's really amazing, this group. And then obviously Tad. I've only ever lived in Atlanta. I mean, I was born in Chicago, but moved here when I was 5. So this is where I've been. Um, I'm curious, like, it just always felt like to me, Atlanta has a real spirit of giving back and working together and all these great leaders and everything. Obviously, I'm sure the other large cities in our country have folks like this, but do you think there's something unique and special about Atlanta that for our sort of nonprofit and civic ways?
Oh, yes. I've lived in Atlanta since the 1990.
Mm,
And I moved here from LA for the opportunity to work with the American Cancer Society. But that's been my experience here, is that there is, some people would just say, well, that's kind of a business application of Southern hospitality, but it's more than that.
yeah.
I think this city attracts people that really do want to work well together in innovative ways and push envelopes. There's a lot of innovation and great stuff going on in Atlanta, and you can feel it in the way that people work together and help each other. And that's how my book came apart.
Yeah.
Reaching out, and people were so gracious and so kind to spend time
Yeah.
with and share their thoughts.
Well, yeah, and again, like I think, I could pick any of those people, but you take like an Ann Kramer and it's like, you know, she just wants to help and do good in this town. Like she's not, where's the business angle? And so yes, I think that heart is really interesting. One of the things too I wanted to ask about is so Raymond King, obviously CEO of the zoo, and used to be over one of the larger corporate philanthropy arms in our town. One of the things he talked about, which I just kept reflecting on as I read through this, is like a lot of these people that you list, they have a great job in the sense that they, the ones, especially the folks at foundations, where they get to, reward a nonprofit with a gift or a partnership, but then they also have the hardest job because they have to break so many hearts. And so I just thought of that as I was looking at this. I'm curious. You talk in this book about the importance of alignment and everything. And then yet at a certain point, there's also like, I know Tad with Delta Airlines, they took a chance on 48 in the early years. So maybe just talk for a minute about as a corporate thinks about from their side of the relationship, how you would recommend they think about, which organizations to work with.
And I think that everybody asks themselves some of the initial same questions. And not so many years ago, there there was a little bit of a firewall between the business side of the company and the philanthropic side of the
Mm,
country. That's not so much it anymore. Over many years, what's happened is they understand, and the smart nonprofits understand the value of enlightened self-interest.
yeah.
That if you can align with a company's business objectives, and that is just one of the strategy points they use in saying, who do we say yes to?
Mm,
And what do we say yes to? Because we can't, like you said, we can't say yes to everybody. And the folks that are in the companies that are in the position of making those kind of decisions, they have huge hearts.
yeah.
And if they could, they'd love to say yes to everybody. But they have to say, okay, where are we going to focus? And you have some companies that say, you know, what's most important to us right now is building a workforce that aligns with where we're going to grow to. And I talk a lot about Jane Turner and her relationship with PNC. They wanted to invest in education. They wanted to invest in workplace readiness. They wanted to invest in the families and the youth so that they would become not only successful human beings in the society, but good customers.
Yeah.
And so most companies are asking themselves, how do we align our heart with what our business needs are? And if a nonprofit can come to the table honoring that knowledge, because you can look it up in most of the companies and you can see what their strategic initiatives are, and you can see what they're trying to do, you'll have much more success if you align yourself with that. And sometimes it you you need to work a little bit to find the alignment.
Mm,
And, I didn't put this part in the book, but, sometimes we think we're in one business, but we're actually in another business, or we have a couple businesses going on. Yes, we wanna feed the poor, but, we got a jam up supply chain thing going on here. We can do transport. We're in the transportation book business, and Sam's Club, I know you're throwing away a whole lot of food, but I think I can not only save you a lot of money
mm,
and time, and in that case, they got a tax credit to boot for solving that problem for Sam's Club, which ultimately solved it for Walmart, which ultimately got, some federal grants as well. So really looking at what business you're in. It's and when Unilever was looking at their Vaseline product, they needed a partner that also had supply chain, but international supply chain.
mm,
They wanted to be able to get that product into the disaster zones quickly where it was needed. The first organization they looked at was a great organization and did great good, but their model was they bought locally. They didn't transport product into the local disaster. They bought locally, which is also a great model, but that didn't fit the business pain and that the Vaseline product team was having. They wanted to be able to enliven that product. I mean, that was a sleepy little product that we all have in our medicine cabinet.
right.
It's used everywhere. It's used in disaster zone. It is really a cool product. And so they wanted to wake people up to how cool that was and get it a fresh image. The team didn't have access to a lot of grant money. So that was one of those factors and one of those requirements, if you will, to be able to have a really great thriving partnership. And when they found direct relief, they found the perfect partner with a supply chain that could take their product and get it where it was needed. It was really beautiful. Direct relief is in about 30 different countries, and they are. If you don't know about them, they are a great organization as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you talk in the book about the difference between transactional relationships and that relational approach. And I think you mentioned the idea of growing a garden together and how that's you're obviously planting seeds and it's got it's a long-term venture. But then on the flip side, the transactional approach, and I believe you talked about Doctors Without Borders turning down a massive potential sponsorship because it didn't align. You want to talk about that story a little bit?
Well, the Doctors Without Borders is the organization that Vaseline usually originally talked to, and
Oh,
they again do fantastic work. They really do, both their volunteers and being able to help get what's needed in a
yeah,
local environment. So the that didn't work. There just wasn't the alignment in terms of what the company needed, which was to move product, and what
right,
nonprofit had to offer, which was great volunteers and great service on the ground, but no supply chain to be able to move product like from developed countries
right.
into to developing countries. And so they did have to turn that down. And it's smart to back away if you aren't a fit, because if you try to force a fit, the chances are it's not going to work really well, and you're not going to get another chance then to try to build a different kind of bridge.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it can be hard for nonprofits. You can get into the idea of chasing, you just got to chase money. And if you can get a yes and run, and especially in difficult economic times. But to your point, I think you have to be thinking about the long term, right? It's not just about that initial check.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I was with Children International, we got an opportunity to talk to the Walton Family Foundation, which is huge if you get a chance to talk to them, because everybody wants to talk to them.
For sure.
And Children International was and is doing some fantastic work in the Little Rock area, which is also where the Walton family's heart and roots are. And they were interested in replicating what we were doing with Title I schools so well in the Little Rock area and the neighboring area. But it was during the pandemic.
Mm,
Dollars, staff, everything was stretched, and the whole world was on its head. Um, and we listened closely to our local staff. And similar to building that garden, you don't just plant a program like that and let it needs nurturing. You have to have relationships. You have to have trust. It takes time to build it. So when Children International stepped back and said, you know what, we can't do this fast on the timeline that would be lovely and they would like to see, we're not sure until we really get into the new community exactly what they need. They might not need this exact same model. So, long story short, it was the nonprofit at that point that said, it was Children International that said, not now, not this. Things aren't aligned for success.
mm,
And that's what people need to ask themselves, both on the profit and the nonprofit side. Are we aligned for success? And not little success, but huge success.
yep.
And that's where the big ideas come from. That's what the World Wildlife Fund did with Coca-Cola, when their leaders got together and said, I think there's a way we could work together. Initially, the leadership staff on both sides said, huh? I mean,
Yeah. Right. This doesn't fit.
but they wrestled with, what are our assets? What are your assets? What do we really stand for? What do you really stand for? How, and all of a sudden, light bulbs that they initially thought weren't there at all.
Mm,
I mean, they were aligned on water. They did care deeply about water. And the World Wildlife Fund, that's water was one of their huge conservation initiatives. And they found a way to make that relationship one of the most iconic ones on the planet now,
yeah.
because they wrestled with those questions.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think the lessons in here can pertain to obviously small, medium-sized, large nonprofits and companies as well. But I really liked the example, the ACS example with Citibank, and you guys uh, did the market research and really dove deep. I think you maybe had an initial offer of a smaller amount, and you went back and really said, hey, here's how we can align our brands. And you want to talk about that example for a second? Again, I know this maybe won't relate as much to smaller nonprofits, but I think there's a lesson there for everybody.
I think so. And I think the lesson applies to everybody. And then maybe there's a couple of lessons in there. This is certainly one that has grounded me and helped me remember a few very important things when I'm building partnerships. But it was shortly after I'd given that opportunity to build this business unit. And Citibank gave me a call and said, look, we'd like to offer you $150,000 a year for a license agreement. We'd like to put the mark and the name on a credit card. And I was just frankly very honest. I didn't know what that was worth.
Hmm.
And so I said, I don't want you to overpay or underpay. And I'm learning. Can we do some market research? Can we take a small sliver of our database and let's see what the response rate is? Let's see what the activation rate is. And the other thing that I didn't mention so much in the book is that our CFO at the time had come from a huge finance background in corporation. And we also had banking people on our board. So I was able, as we got more and more into the conversation and the relationship, get great mentorship and advice from some people that really knew that arena really well. American Cancer Society is great at funding young investor research. They're great at doing a lot of things, but banking wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did that research, and it knocked our socks off. I mean, Citibank came back and said, how about 15 million over 5 years?
It's amazing. I
And
mean, it's crazy.
and so that was great. And it just speaks again to what we said earlier, is that, people that work in companies, they have huge hearts, but they also have a business to run.
Yeah.
The reverse is also true, is nonprofit, the folks that live there, they have huge hearts. You don't work in a nonprofit generally if you don't have a huge heart.
Yeah.
But more and more and more, especially over the last decade or so, they also have a lot of business savvy. And so we need to come to the table as business partners when we have these kind of conversations.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about that heart, and I think most nonprofits, or rather the foundational side of corporate, and even the sponsorship side, they usually have their list of what we're looking for, companies to partner with that have these attributes, but you also talk about breaking the rules sometimes. And sometimes that can be a local level or something. So can you talk about that? Just like, and again, I'll point to Tad at Delta. He broke the rules to help me at 48 and 48 in the early days. It didn't really fit any of their markers, but he wanted to support, a local thing that was happening. And, so I think I've seen that, that help a tremendous amount. But can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, these strategies that both nonprofits and profits put in place to help them make a decision and make choices, they are a place to start, not a place to finish. And if you understand those rules well, you can navigate them creatively, which is another way of saying break the rules. But like a company, like in Atlanta, they have a huge heart for Atlanta. The companies want to work together to make this a fabulous place, so more business will come here and everybody will continue to be even bigger and bigger winners. Well, to do that, you have to play together, and you have to play with the city, and you have to play with the other folks that are trying to help the city grow in that way. And that might mean that you're going to fund something you wouldn't otherwise naturally fund. When the Football Hall of Fame came to town, there are several folks where that, in essence, might not have fit their philanthropic strategy, but it fit the strategy to be a team player in building this city the way everybody wants it to be. And so you come together and you fund that. The other little thing that I mentioned in the book, that if you understand how companies need to play with local municipalities, or how they need to play with other governmental authorities, you can still approach them even if you don't fit their traditional one. A great example of that was in Ecuador with Children International. Again, they had the banking industry there in Quito was required to give financial literacy. Now, maybe that one isn't a perfect example, because of that also became one of their focal points. But that was what Children International locally there went in the door with. We can do that. we can do that. And, and
Yep.
they got funded, so knowing what they need and being able to speak to how fabulous you are at doing that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I've got so many interesting things that I pulled from this that again I will now be taking into the work that I'm doing. But gosh, I wish I'd had it when I was younger and doing this. What I really liked about the book is you share principles on this, but then obviously real stories as we've been talking about. I guess I got to ask here at the end, like, what's next? We got a part 2 coming. You got another idea that's hatching over there?
Well, right now, I just want to help get the word out about the book and all of the 35 people that helped the book come alive. Because the reason I wrote it is to help people find those high value partnership conversations and lean into them. And so right now for the next near future, I guess, is
That's the
that
focus.
I'm just trying to
Yeah.
get the word out, and I'm having fun doing that. But there's another book in me. So
Yes, I figured there was. You got you got some stories and a great amount of experience. Well, Cynthia, I mean, one of the things that I talk about is trying to have an outsized positive impact, and I think you're doing that with this book. People will read this, people will forge greater partnerships together, more good will be done. So I just love the spirit of this, and I'm so glad you brought it into the world.
thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. I
Yeah, I'll hope to see you soon.
Good. Thank you. Me too.